The cold autumn wind howled across the Montana prairie as Fletcher Kane crested the hill on his paint stallion. Nothing could have prepared him for the sight below: a woman, alone in the dying light, methodically digging a grave in the rocky soil. The year was 1883, and life in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains was as unforgiving as the approaching winter. Fletcher pulled his hat lower against the wind, watching the woman's determined movements. Her dress was torn and mudded, her hands raw from the wooden shovel she wielded with desperate purpose. Beside her lay a small bundle wrapped in a quilt, and Fletcher felt his heart sink with understanding. He dismounted, leaving his horse to graze as he approached cautiously. The sound of his spurs alerted her, and she spun around, clutching the shovel like a weapon. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, her eyes wild with a grief so profound it made Fletcher stop in his tracks. "Madam," he said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You shouldn't be out here alone." "Leave me be," she replied, her voice hoarse from crying. "This is private business." Fletcher nodded toward the small bundle. "Your child." The woman's face crumpled and she leaned on the shovel to keep from falling. "My son, Samuel. The fever took him yesterday." Her voice broke on the last word. "I'm Fletcher Kane," he said. "I ranch about 5 miles east of here." "Beatrice Blackburn," she replied automatically, as if social niceties still mattered even in the depths of her despair. "My husband's claim was north of Concord." Fletcher noticed her use of past tense. Beatrice resumed digging, each thrust of the shovel more forceful than necessary. "Walter died 3 months ago. Mining accident. Now Samuel." She couldn't finish. Fletcher removed his coat despite the biting wind and laid it on a nearby rock. Without asking permission, he took the shovel from her trembling hands. No mother should have to dig her child's grave alone. Beatrice didn't protest. She sank to her knees beside the small bundle, her fingers gently stroking the quilt. Fletcher worked in silence, digging deep despite the hard ground. The rhythm of the work gave him time to think, to observe the woman from the corner of his eye. She couldn't be older than 25, though grief had etched temporary lines around her eyes and mouth. Her hair, coming loose from its pins, was the color of wheat at harvest. When the grave was deep enough, Fletcher stopped. "Would you like to say some words?" he asked. Beatrice nodded, gathering the bundle into her arms one last time. She rocked her son gently, singing a lullaby so softly that Fletcher had to strain to hear it. When she finished, she pressed her lips to the quilt before placing the bundle in the grave. "He was just 4 years old," she whispered. "He loved watching the birds in the morning." Fletcher removed his hat as Beatrice recited the Lord's Prayer. When she finished, he began filling in the grave, each shovelful of dirt falling with a terrible finality. When it was done, he found some stones to mark the spot. "What will you do now?" he asked as the darkness gathered around them. Beatrice stared at the small mound, her expression vacant. "I don't know. The claim is worthless. The cabin." She trailed off, her eyes unfocused. Fletcher made a decision then, one that would alter the course of both their lives. "You can't stay out here. I have room at my ranch, at least until you figure out what's next." She looked at him fully for the first time, suspicion clouding her features. "Why would you help me?" Fletcher thought of his own sister, lost to childbirth fever 3 years earlier, and how he'd failed to reach her in time. "Because no one should be alone with this kind of grief, Mrs. Blackburn." Beatrice regarded him for a long moment before nodding once. There was nothing left for her here now, just a small grave on a windswept hill. Fletcher helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. He felt her stiffen at their proximity, then gradually relax as exhaustion overtook her. By the time they reached his modest ranch house, she was leaning against him, half asleep. The cabin was simple but sturdy, 2 bedrooms, a main room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen with a cast iron stove. Fletcher had built it himself after staking his claim 5 years earlier. "You'll take the 2nd bedroom," he said, lighting a lamp. "It was my sister's when she visited." Beatrice stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. "I have nothing to pay you with." Fletcher shook his head. "There'll be time enough to figure all that out. For now, you need rest." He showed her to the small bedroom, leaving her with a nightgown that had belonged to his sister. "I'll be up a while longer, seeing to the animals. There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up." Alone in the room, Beatrice sank onto the bed, still clutching the wooden shovel handle she hadn't realized she'd brought with her. The reality of what had happened, what she had lost, crashed over her in waves. Samuel's laughter, his small hand in hers, the way he called her Mama with such love. All gone. Walter had been a good man, if not an especially warm one, but Samuel had been her heart walking outside her body. She curled onto her side, still fully dressed, and surrendered to the exhaustion. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Fletcher Kane's kindness and unexpected light in her darkest hour. Fletcher tended the horses and checked his small herd of cattle before returning to the house. He moved quietly, aware that his guest might be sleeping. The spare room door was closed, but no light shone beneath it. He sat at his rough-hewn table and poured himself a small measure of whiskey, contemplating the strange turn his day had taken. He'd ridden out that morning to check on a section of fence, never imagining he'd return with a grieving widow. His sister Alice would have approved, he thought. She always said he was too solitary by half. Fletcher wasn't sure what he'd do with Beatrice Blackburn in the long run. But for tonight, at least she was safe and had a roof over her head. When morning came, Fletcher rose before dawn as usual. He had eggs frying and coffee brewing when Beatrice emerged from the bedroom, her hair hastily pinned up, wearing the same dress from yesterday. "I didn't mean to sleep so long," she said, hovering in the doorway. Fletcher gestured to the table. "Sit, eat something." She obeyed, though she merely picked at the eggs and biscuits he set before her. "I should get back to my cabin today. There are things I need to gather." Fletcher nodded. "I'll take you after breakfast. It's no trouble." Beatrice studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. "Why are you being so kind to a stranger, Mr. Kane?" Fletcher considered his words carefully. "My father taught me that a man's character is measured by how he treats those who can do nothing for him in return." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Fletcher replied. "Died in the war when I was 16. Confederate side." They ate in silence for a few minutes before Beatrice spoke again. "I lost my parents in a fire when I was 12. Walter was my father's business partner's son. He looked after me, and when I turned 18, we married." She stared into her cup. "It wasn't a love match, but he was good to me." After breakfast, they rode to Beatrice's claim. The cabin was small and poorly constructed, clearly the work of someone who knew mining better than building. Inside, everything was neat but sparse, a testament to Beatrice's housekeeping despite limited means. She moved through the rooms with purpose, gathering clothing, a few books, a wooden box that seemed to hold particular importance, and a small rag doll that must have been Samuel's. When she came to his little bed in the corner, she stopped, her hand hovering over the pillow. Fletcher busied himself outside, giving her privacy for this painful task. When she finally emerged with a bundle of possessions, her eyes were red but dry. "I'm ready," she said simply. As they rode back to Fletcher's ranch, Beatrice broke the silence. "I can cook and keep house to earn my keep, and I sew well enough." "There's no rush to decide anything," Fletcher replied. "Take some time to grieve. Grief doesn't put food on the table, Mr. Kane." "Fletcher," he corrected. And I've managed to feed myself for years. Having someone else around won't break me. The days turned into weeks, and Beatrice gradually established a routine at the ranch. She cooked and cleaned, insisting on making herself useful despite Fletcher's assurances that it wasn't necessary. She spent her evenings by the fire, sometimes raiding, sometimes just staring into the flames. Fletcher respected her grief, giving her space while ensuring she wasn't alone for too long. He talked about practical matters: the cattle, the weather, news from Concord when he made the occasional trip to town. He never asked about Samuel or Walter, but he noticed the way she sometimes paused in her work, lost in memories. One evening in late November, Fletcher returned from checking the herd to find Beatrice kneeling in front of a trunk he kept near the fireplace. It was open, revealing the few mementos he had of his sister: a cameo brooch, some letters, a daguerreotype. "I'm sorry," Beatrice said, quickly closing the lid. "I was looking for more firewood and thought there might be some kindling in here." "It's all right," Fletcher replied, removing his coat. "That was Alice's trunk. My sister." Beatrice hesitated, then asked, "The one whose room I'm using?" Fletcher nodded, sitting in his chair by the fire. "She died 3 years ago, childbed fever. Her husband sent for me, but the roads were bad. I didn't make it in time." He stared into the flames. "She was always the better one of us two." Beatrice moved to sit in the chair opposite his. "I saw the photograph. She was beautiful." "She was kind," Fletcher said, "always seeing the best in people. Even during the war, when things were at their worst, she'd find some reason to hope." He smiled sadly. "She'd have liked you." Beatrice looked startled. "Me? Why?" "You have the same strength. Different kind, maybe, but it's there." She shook her head. "I'm not strong. If I were, I wouldn't have fallen apart so completely." Fletcher leaned forward. "Grief isn't weakness, Beatrice, and you didn't fall apart. You were digging that grave yourself." Most would have collapsed entirely. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "I had to do it. No one else was going to, and Samuel deserved a proper burial." "Tell me about him," Fletcher said softly, "if you want to." For a moment he thought she might refuse, but then she began to speak. "He had Walter's eyes, but my smile. At least that's what Walter said. He was curious about everything, always asking why the sky was blue or where the birds went at night." A small smile touched her lips. "He collected rocks, ordinary ones, nothing special, but he treated each one like treasure." Fletcher listened as she spoke, her memories pouring out like water from a spring. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she cried, but the words kept coming until the fire had burned low. "I haven't talked about him like that since," she finally said, wiping her eyes. "Sometimes remembering is the only way forward," Fletcher replied. Beatrice nodded, rising from her chair. "Thank you for listening." "Good night, Fletcher." "Good night, Beatrice." After she left, Fletcher remained by the fire, thinking about the woman who had come into his life so unexpectedly. He hadn't realized how solitary his existence had become until her presence illuminated the emptiness of his days before. She was still deep in grief, and he had no right to think of her as anything but a woman in need of help. But he couldn't deny the way his heart lightened when she entered a room. December brought heavy snow and bitter cold. The ranch was isolated, with Concord a difficult journey even in good weather. Fletcher and Beatrice settled into a comfortable routine, working together to maintain the ranch through the harsh winter months. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, Fletcher taught Beatrice how to play chess using a set his father had carved years ago. She was a quick study, her brow furrowed in concentration as she considered each move. "Walter never had time for games," she said, moving her knight. "He was always planning the next dig, sure that the big strike was just around the corner." "Was he a good husband?" Fletcher asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Forgive me, that's none of my business." Beatrice captured one of his pawns. He was devoted to providing for us. Not affectionate by nature, but he never raised his voice or his hand to me. She paused. He adored Samuel, though he didn't always know how to show it. And you, did you love him? She considered the question seriously. I was grateful to him. He saved me from the poorhouse after my parents died. When he proposed, it seemed like the natural course of things. She looked up from the board. I cared deeply for him, but I sometimes wonder if I even know what love is supposed to feel like. Fletcher moved his bishop. My father used to say that real love isn't a feeling but a choice, choosing someone's happiness alongside your own, day after day. By that measure, I suppose I did love Walter, Beatrice replied, but there was always something missing. A spark, perhaps. She captured Fletcher's bishop with a smile. Checkmate in 3 moves. Fletcher laughed, conceding the game. You're a natural strategist, Mrs. Blackburn. Beatrice, she corrected, her smile reaching her eyes for the first time since he'd known her. As Christmas approached, Fletcher noticed Beatrice becoming withdrawn again. She went about her tasks with mechanical efficiency, but the small progress she'd made seemed to have reversed. On Christmas Eve, he returned from the barn to find her sitting at the table, staring at a small wooden horse. I carved it for Samuel last Christmas, she explained without looking up. He carried it everywhere. Fletcher sat across from her. The first Christmas is the hardest. When Alice died, I couldn't bear to celebrate it all. How did you get through it? One day at a time, Fletcher said honestly, and not always well, but eventually the good memories started to outweigh the pain of losing her. Beatrice looked up at him, her eyes filled with a desperation that tore at his heart. When does it stop hurting like this? Fletcher reached across the table and took her hand. I can't tell you that, but I can promise you won't face it alone. She gripped his hand tightly, and they sat in silence as the snow fell outside. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. Fletcher rose early and found Beatrice already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She'd made an effort with her appearance, wearing a dark green dress he hadn't seen before, her hair arranged more carefully than usual. "Merry Christmas," she said, offering him a tentative smile. "Merry Christmas," he replied, surprised by the transformation. "You look—" "I thought I should make an effort for the holiday," she explained, a hint of color in her cheeks. "This was my good dress from before." After breakfast, Fletcher presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It isn't much," he said, suddenly self-conscious. Beatrice unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather-bound journal and a good fountain pen. "Fletcher, this is too fine a gift. I thought you might want to write down your memories of Samuel," he explained, "so they'll never fade." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were different from the tears of raw grief he'd seen before. "Thank you. It's perfect." She reached beneath the table and brought out a package of her own. "I have something for you as well." Fletcher opened it to find a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "When did you make this? I never saw you working on it." "Late at night when I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "The wool is from that trader who passed through last month." Fletcher wrapped the scarf around his neck. "It's the finest gift I've had in years." They spent the day quietly, enjoying a simple Christmas dinner and sharing stories of holidays past. For the first time, Beatrice spoke of Samuel's delight at Christmas last year, smiling through her tears at the memory of his excitement. As winter deepened, so did the connection between Fletcher and Beatrice. They worked side by side during the day and talked by the fire in the evenings. Fletcher told her about his time fighting in the war, his decision to head west afterward, and his dreams for the ranch. Beatrice shared stories of her childhood before the fire, her adjustment to life as Walter's wife, and her joy in motherhood. In February, A particularly vicious storm kept them housebound for days. On the third evening, restless from confinement, Fletcher brought out a bottle of brandy he'd been saving and poured small glasses for each of them. "To surviving another Montana winter," he toasted. Beatrice sipped the brandy, making a face at the burn. "It's been almost 5 months since Samuel died," she said suddenly. "Sometimes I feel guilty when I realize I've gone hours without thinking of him." "That's not forgetting," Fletcher assured her. "It's healing." "I dreamed of him last night," she continued. "He was playing in a meadow, laughing. I woke up smiling instead of crying." Fletcher nodded in understanding. "That's how it should be, remembering the joy instead of just the loss." Beatrice studied him in the firelight. "You've been my salvation, Fletcher Kane. I don't know how to thank you. Having you here has been." Fletcher searched for the right word. "I didn't realize how lonely I'd become until you arrived." Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of feelings that had been growing beneath the surface. Beatrice looked away first, setting down her brandy glass. "I should check on that stew," she said, rising quickly. Fletcher let her go, knowing that whatever was developing between them would need time for her heart to heal, time for her to see herself as more than a grieving mother and widow. By spring, Beatrice had established herself as an essential part of the ranch's operation. She kept the books with a precision Fletcher had never managed, helped with the lambing, and even learned to ride Fletcher's gentle mare for trips into Concord when the weather permitted. In town, people raised eyebrows at their living arrangement, but Fletcher paid them no mind. Beatrice was more sensitive to the whispers, however, and after one particularly uncomfortable encounter with the minister's wife, she raised the subject on their ride home. "Perhaps I should find a position in Concord," she said, "as a housekeeper or seamstress." Fletcher's grip tightened on the reins. "Is that what you want?" "No," she admitted, "but it might be for the best. People talk." "Let them," Fletcher replied. "Unless you're uncomfortable staying at the ranch," Beatrice shook her head. "It's become more of a home to me than anywhere since my parents died. But I don't want to damage your reputation." Fletcher laughed. "My reputation as a solitary rancher with more cattle than social graces, I doubt that can be lowered much further." His expression grew serious. "The ranch is your home for as long as you want it to be, Beatrice." The look she gave him then, full of gratitude and something warmer, made his heart skip a beat. But still, he held back from expressing his deepening feelings, fearing she wasn't ready to hear them. In May, on a warm Sunday afternoon, Fletcher suggested they ride to the hills east of the ranch where wildflowers carpeted the meadows. Beatrice agreed eagerly, having developed a love for the untamed beauty of the Montana landscape. They spread a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree and shared a simple lunch. Afterward, Beatrice lay back, watching the clouds through the branches. "I never thought I could feel peaceful again," she said softly. "After Samuel died, I thought that part of me was buried with him." Fletcher propped himself on one elbow, watching her. "You've come a long way." She turned to face him. "Because of you, your kindness, your patience." She reached out to touch his face hesitantly. "Your understanding." Fletcher caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "Beatrice, he stopped, uncertain how to proceed. "What is it?" she prompted. "I care for you," he said simply. "More than as a friend or someone to look after, but I don't want to rush you or assume anything." Beatrice's eyes widened, but she didn't pull her hand away. "I've felt it too," she confessed, "and it frightens me. Not because of you, but because I'm afraid to lose someone again." "I can't promise nothing will ever happen to me," Fletcher said. "Life's too uncertain for that, but I can promise to cherish every day we might have together." Beatrice sat up, pulling her hand back as tears filled her eyes. "Walter and I married out of convenience and duty. With you, these feelings are different, stronger, more frightening." Fletcher sat up beside her. "We don't need to decide anything today. I just wanted you to know where I stand." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "Thank you for being honest. I need time to think." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, both aware that something fundamental had changed between them. That night, Beatrice retired early, claiming fatigue, but Fletcher suspected she needed space to process their conversation. He sat alone by the fire, wondering if he'd spoken too soon. Perhaps she would never see him as more than a benefactor, a kind man who'd helped her through her grief. The thought brought a surprising ache to his chest. The next morning, Beatrice was already up and making breakfast when Fletcher emerged from his room. She greeted him normally, making no reference to their conversation of the previous day. Fletcher followed her lead, talking about the ranch work that needed doing and a letter he'd received from a cattle buyer in Helena. For several days, they maintained this careful dance, their interaction cordial but reserved. Fletcher began to regret his confession, fearing he'd damaged the easy friendship they'd developed. Then, one evening as he returned from checking the herd, he found Beatrice waiting for him on the porch, her expression serious. "I need to show you something," she said, leading him inside. On the table lay the journal he'd given her for Christmas, open to a page covered in her neat handwriting. "I've been writing in this every day," she explained. "At first, just memories of Samuel as you suggested, but lately it's been more." She gestured for him to read, and Fletcher sat down, pulling the journal closer. The entry was dated the previous day. "I dream of Samuel less frequently now," he read aloud, "but when I do, he is always happy, always at peace. Yesterday, in my dream, he was playing by a stream, and he looked up at me and said, 'It's all right, Mama. You can be happy now.' When I woke, I realized he was giving me permission to live again, to love again. Fletcher has awakened feelings in me I never knew existed. With Walter, I was grateful and content. With Fletcher, I feel alive. When he confessed his feelings on Sunday, my first instinct was fear of loss, fear of betraying Walter's memory, fear of replacing Samuel in my heart. But I realize now that love doesn't replace or diminish what came before. It adds to it, expands the heart's capacity. Samuel will always be my beloved son. Walter will always be the man who protected and provided for me. But Fletcher could be my future, my chance at a different kind of love, one based not on obligation but on choice." Fletcher looked up from the journal to find Beatrice watching him intently. "What are you saying, Beatrice?" "I'm saying I choose you," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "If you'll still have me." Fletcher stood, crossing to her in 2 strides. He took her hands in his heart pounding. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel rushed or obligated." Beatrice smiled, a true, radiant smile that transformed her face. "I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Fletcher Kane." He pulled her gently into his arms, kissing her with all the tenderness he'd been holding back for months. She responded with surprising passion, her hands moving to his shoulders, then his face. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Beatrice. I think I have since that first day, seeing your courage even in your darkest moment." "I wasn't brave," she whispered. "I was just surviving." "Sometimes that's the bravest thing of all," he replied. That night, they sat by the fire talking until the early hours, planning their future together. Fletcher proposed formally, offering his mother's ring that he kept in a small box in his dresser. It was a simple gold band with a single pearl, nothing fancy but full of history and meaning. "We should wait a full year from Walter's passing," Beatrice said practically, "for propriety's sake." Fletcher agreed, though he admitted he'd marry her tomorrow if she were willing. They decided to announce their engagement in town the following Sunday, facing the gossips head-on with their plans. The reaction in Concord was mixed. Some, like Sheriff Morris and his wife, offered sincere congratulations. Others, particularly the minister's wife and her circle, were less approving, citing the speed of the arrangement following Walter's death. But Fletcher and Beatrice stood firm in their decision, their happiness evident to anyone who truly looked. Summer brought long days of ranch work interspersed with quiet evenings of planning their life together. Fletcher started building an addition to the cabin, 2 more rooms that would give them space to grow as a family. Beatrice planted a larger garden, adding flowers among the vegetables, bringing color and life to the ranch yard. In July, they rode together to the hill where Samuel was buried. Beatrice had avoided returning since that terrible day, but now she felt strong enough to face it. Fletcher held her hand as they stood by the small grave, now marked with a proper wooden cross he had made. "I want to tell him about us," Beatrice explained. "It feels important somehow." Fletcher nodded in understanding, stepping back to give her privacy. Beatrice knelt by the grave, speaking softly to her son, telling him about her new life, her plans to marry Fletcher, and how Samuel would always hold a special place in her heart. When she finished, she placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the grave and rejoined Fletcher. "I'd like to visit him more regularly," she said. "Bring him flowers, tell him about our life." "We'll come whenever you want," Fletcher promised, helping her back onto her horse. As they rode home, Beatrice said, "I've been thinking about children. Our children, I mean." Fletcher glanced at her, surprised by the topic. "What about them?" "I want them," she said simply. "I was afraid to even think about it for so long, afraid of replacing Samuel or tempting fate. But being a mother is part of who I am, and the thought of having a child with you." She trailed off, blushing slightly. Fletcher reached across to take her hand. "I'd like nothing more than to raise a family with you, Beatrice, though I confess the prospect of fatherhood is somewhat terrifying." She laughed, the sound carrying on the summer breeze. "You'll be wonderful. You're patient and kind and steady, all the things a child needs. And you're loving and strong," he replied. "Our children will be fortunate indeed." August brought the cattle drive, a busy, exhausting time as Fletcher and his few hired hands moved the herd to market. Beatrice stayed behind, managing the ranch in his absence with a competence that impressed even Fletcher's most experienced hand, an old cowboy named Jasper who'd been with him since the beginning. When Fletcher returned after 2 weeks away, the reunion was sweet indeed. Beatrice ran to meet him as he rode in, unmindful of propriety or the amused looks of the other men. Fletcher swung down from his horse and caught her in his arms, kissing her soundly. "I missed you something fierce," he murmured against her hair. "The house was too quiet without you," she replied. "I kept finding myself listening for your footsteps." That night, after the hands had been fed and had retired to the bunkhouse, Fletcher and Beatrice sat on the porch watching the stars come out. "3 more months until we can marry," Fletcher said, his arm around her shoulders. Beatrice leaned against him contentedly. "It will go quickly with harvest and winter preparations." "I was thinking," Fletcher said hesitantly, "that we might take a trip after the wedding, to Helena perhaps, or even as far as Denver. I've saved enough over the years." Beatrice looked up at him in surprise. "A wedding trip? I never thought I'd have such a luxury." "You deserve it," Fletcher insisted. "We both do, a fresh start with memories that are just ours." She kissed him softly. "I'd like that very much." September brought the harvest, and October the first snow. November was a flurry of wedding preparations, with Beatrice sewing a new dress of deep blue wool and Fletcher arranging for the circuit preacher to perform the ceremony at the ranch. As Beatrice was reluctant to marry in the Concord church, after the minister's wife's disapproval. On December 10, 1884, with the ranch house decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons, Fletcher Kane and Beatrice Blackburn were married in front of a small gathering of neighbors and friends. Sheriff Morris stood as Fletcher's witness, and the sheriff's wife stood for Beatrice. Beatrice wore her blue dress with a small brooch that had belonged to Fletcher's mother pinned at her throat. Fletcher wore his best suit, nervously adjusting his collar until Jasper told him gruffly to stand still before he wore a hole in the floorboards. When Beatrice appeared at the doorway of her room, Fletcher felt his breath catch. She was beautiful not in the conventional way of society ladies, but with a strength and grace that came from within. Her eyes, meeting his across the room, held a promise of the future they would build together. The ceremony was simple and brief. They exchanged vows and rings, Fletcher's mother's band for Beatrice, and a plain gold one Beatrice had purchased in Concord for Fletcher. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Fletcher kissed his bride to the cheers and applause of their guests. The celebration afterward was lively. With food Beatrice had spent days preparing and music, provided by one of the hands who played a fiddle. Fletcher and Beatrice danced in the cleared space of their main room, her skirts swirling as he guided her through a waltz he'd practiced in secret with Jasper's reluctant assistance. As the evening wore on and guests began to depart, Fletcher found himself watching his wife. As she bid farewell to the last visitors, when the door closed behind them, leaving the newlyweds alone at last, Beatrice turned to him with a smile that held both shyness and anticipation. "Mrs. Kane," Fletcher said, crossing to her and taking her hands in his. "How do you like the sound of that?" "Very much," she replied, her eyes shining, "though it may take some getting used to." That night, as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, Fletcher's tenderness and Beatrice's trust created a bond deeper than either had imagined possible. Afterward, as she lay in his arms, Beatrice thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the terrible grief that had seemed endless, the slow healing, and the unexpected love that had given her a second chance at happiness. "What are you thinking?" Fletcher asked, stroking her hair. "That life takes strange turns," she replied. "A year ago I had lost everything. Now I feel as though I've been given everything." Fletcher kissed her forehead. "We've been given each other, and that's enough." 2 days after the wedding, they set out for their trip to Denver, leaving Jasper in charge of the ranch. The journey by train was a marvel to Beatrice, who had never traveled further than Helena. Fletcher delighted in showing her the changing landscape, the growing cities, and the luxuries of hotel living. In Denver, they stayed at a respectable hotel near the center of the city. Fletcher bought Beatrice a pretty silver bracelet as a wedding gift, and she found him a fine leather wallet to replace his worn one. They attended a theatrical performance, dined in restaurants, and walked arm in arm through the bustling streets, enjoying the anonymity and freedom of the city. On their last night in Denver, as they prepared for bed in their hotel room, Beatrice approached Fletcher with an unusually serious expression. "I have something to tell you," she said, sitting beside him on the edge of the bed. "I wanted to be sure before I said anything." Fletcher took her hand, concerned by her tone. "What is it? Are you unwell?" Beatrice shook her head, a smile breaking through her seriousness. "Quite the opposite. I believe I'm with child, Fletcher." His eyes widened as her words registered. "A baby, our baby." She nodded, laughing at his stunned expression. "It's early yet, but I'm fairly certain. I've missed my monthly time, and I've been feeling different, tired in the afternoons, queasy in the mornings." Fletcher pulled her into his arms, his joy mixed with concern. "Are you happy about this?" "I know it might bring up difficult memories." Beatrice leaned back to look at him. "I am happy. Nervous, of course, and yes, there's a bittersweet element to it, but mostly I'm filled with hope." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "This child will never replace Samuel, but he or she will be loved just as completely in their own way." Fletcher kissed her, pouring all his emotion into the gesture. "You are remarkable, Beatrice Kane, and I love you more each day." They returned to the ranch with their joyful secret, deciding to wait until Beatrice's condition was more certain before sharing the news. The winter passed in a cocoon of newlywed happiness, their anticipation of the baby adding an extra dimension to their contentment. In March, when Beatrice's condition was unmistakable, they rode into Concord to see the doctor and officially announce their news. Dr. Wilson confirmed what they already knew: Beatrice was healthy, and the baby was expected in late July or early August. The spring and early summer were busy as Fletcher prepared for both the arrival of the baby and the annual cattle drive. The addition to the house was completed, with a nursery adjoining their bedroom and a small sitting room where Beatrice could sew and read. As Beatrice's time grew nearer, Fletcher arranged for Jasper to lead the cattle drive, unwilling to leave his wife when she might need him most. Jasper grumbled good-naturedly about womenfolk turning good cowboys soft, but Fletcher knew the old hand was actually pleased for him. July brought intense heat and the final preparations for the baby's arrival. Fletcher found himself alternately excited and terrified at the prospect of fatherhood. Late one night, as Beatrice lay beside him, her hand resting on her rounded belly, he confessed his fears. "What if I'm not good at this? Being a father, I mean. My own father was gone so much, fighting in the war, then trying to rebuild afterward." Beatrice turned to face him. "You'll be wonderful. I've seen how you are with the young calves, with the new foal so gentle and patient. A child needs love more than anything, and you have that in abundance." Her confidence in him eased his worries, at least temporarily. "And you, are you afraid?" She was quiet for a moment. "Not of motherhood itself. I've done that before, and it was the greatest joy of my life." She took his hand and placed it where the baby was kicking. "But I am afraid of loss. I know too well how quickly happiness can be snatched away." Fletcher held her close. "We can't predict the future, but we can face it together. Whatever comes, you won't be alone." On the evening of August 3, 1885, Beatrice felt the first pains of labor. By morning, Fletcher had sent one of the hands for Dr. Wilson, and by mid-afternoon the doctor had arrived, bringing with him the sheriff's wife, who had experience assisting at births. Fletcher was banished to the porch, where he paced nervously as Beatrice's labor progressed. The sounds from within her occasional cries of pain, the murmured instructions from the doctor, tested his resolve not to burst in and demand to know what was happening. As dusk fell, the sheriff's wife appeared at the door. "Mr. Kane, your wife is asking for you." Fletcher rushed inside to find Beatrice propped up in their bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Fletcher approached the bed on unsteady legs, overwhelmed by the moment. The baby was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and a reddened face scrunched in sleep. When Fletcher sat beside them, Beatrice carefully transferred the infant to his arms. "He's perfect," Fletcher whispered, afraid to wake the sleeping child. "Just like his mother." Beatrice smiled, her eyes filled with happy tears. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on any, wanting to see the child first. Now, looking at his son's face, Fletcher knew. "What about James?" "After my father," Beatrice nodded. "James Kane, it suits him." She hesitated, then added, "And perhaps Samuel as his middle name, to honor his brother." Fletcher's throat tightened with emotion. "James Samuel Kane. A fine name for a fine boy." The first weeks with James were a blur of exhaustion and joy. Beatrice took to motherhood again with the ease of experience, though she confessed to Fletcher that each milestone brought both happiness and a pang of remembrance for Samuel's similar moments. Fletcher found fatherhood both more terrifying and more rewarding than he'd imagined. The first time James wrapped his tiny fingers around Fletcher's thumb, he felt a connection so profound it brought tears to his eyes. The first time the baby really smiled. Not just a gas bubble, as Beatrice teasingly suggested, Fletcher felt his heart expand with love he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. As autumn painted the Montana landscape in golds and reds, Fletcher took Beatrice and James to visit Samuel's grave. They stood together, their son bundled against the chill as Beatrice spoke softly to her firstborn, telling him about his little brother, promising he would always be remembered. On the ride home, Beatrice said, "I want James to know about Samuel as he grows up. I want him to understand that love continues even after loss." Fletcher reached across to squeeze her hand. "He will, and he'll know that his mother's heart is big enough for all of us." The years that followed brought more children to the Kane family: a daughter, Alice, named for Fletcher's sister, born in 1887, another son, Thomas, in 1889, and finally, another daughter, Elizabeth, in 1892. Each birth was a celebration, each child a unique blessing that added to the tapestry of their family life. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Fletcher's cattle operation expanded, and Beatrice added a successful sideline in breeding horses, having discovered a talent for training that surprised even herself. They built a larger home to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original cabin standing as a reminder of their beginnings. Samuel was not forgotten. Each year on his birthday and the anniversary of his death, the family would visit his grave, now surrounded by a small white fence and always adorned with fresh flowers. As the children grew old enough to understand, they were told about their older brother who lived in heaven. They accepted this with the simple faith of childhood, occasionally leaving small treasures: a pretty stone, a feather, a wildflower at his grave. In the spring of 1893, nearly 10 years after Beatrice and Fletcher had met, they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard. James, nearly 8, was showing Thomas how to throw a rope around a post. Alice was picking flowers with 4-year-old Elizabeth toddling after her. "Did you ever imagine this?" Beatrice asked, leaning against Fletcher's shoulder. "That day when you found me on that hillside?" Fletcher shook his head. "I just wanted to help someone who was suffering. I never dreamed it would lead to all this." He gestured to their home, their children, the prosperous ranch spread out before them. "I was so lost that day," Beatrice said softly. "I thought my life was over, that there could never be joy again." She turned to look at him, her face now lined with laugh lines rather than grief. "You didn't just help me, Fletcher. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Fletcher kissed her gently. "We saved each other, Beatrice. And we built this life together, one day at a time." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Fletcher and Beatrice Kane watched their children come running toward the house, called by the dinner bell. The sounds of their laughter, the sight of their happy faces, the feeling of home and family, all of it had grown from that tragic day when a grieving mother dug her child's grave, and a kind cowboy stopped to help. Life had come full circle. Where once there had been only grief and loss, now there was joy and hope. Beatrice's heart, once shattered beyond repair, had healed and expanded to embrace a love and happiness she never thought possible. And Fletcher, who had been content in his solitude, discovered that the greatest gift life could offer was the family he and Beatrice had created together. As they gathered their children and went inside to the warmth and light of their home, both Fletcher and Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that this love, this family, this life they'd built from the ashes of tragedy was the truest form of healing either could have imagined.